Pavita Singh is the executive director of Girls Health Ed. Their mission is to advance gender equality by fostering empowered, healthy, and informed decision-making in adolescent girls and young women through comprehensive health and sexuality education. Pavita is a graduate of Yale University, where she received her Master's of Public Health in Social and Behavioral Sciences. Her graduate thesis explored the relationship between digital intimate partner violence and mental health outcomes. She also has a Bachelor of Arts in Gender and Sexuality Studies, Linguistics, and Child-Adolescent Mental Health from New York University. Prior to taking over as Girls Health Ed's Executive Director, Pavita served for 6 years as the organization's Director of Programs and Outreach, during which time she created and tailored Girls Health Ed's curriculum, trained over 100 teaching fellows, built partnerships with 50 schools and community centers across all program locations, and taught workshops in the United States and Kenya. Pavita is the international best-selling author of To All the Magic in Me, a poetry book on mental health, self-care, and emotions. She will be donating a portion of the proceeds from book sales to Girls Health Ed in order to contribute to the health, well-being, and happiness of girls and young women everywhere. Hi, Pavita. Welcome to the Conscious Cup. I'm so excited to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me. It's so great to reconnect.
Yes. Pavita and I go way back, it seems. Our dads are connected and introduced us when I was in college. You were doing amazing work then, but I'm so excited to just dig deep with you and hear more about what you're doing. Pavita is the executive director of Girls Health Ed, so I would love you to just start us off explaining what Girls Health Ed is.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you so much for that, Simone. And before we get into that, I do also want to give a shout out to our dads for connecting us and for being awesome. And I think that this is extra special because about 2 years ago, I think 2 to 3 years ago, right in the midst of the pandemic, our dads did pretty much something identical to what we're doing now, where your dad, Simone, interviewed my dad for a podcast. And now here we are 3 years later, 2 or 3 years later, doing the exact same thing. So shout out to them. I'm sure that they're really excited about this as well. And not only are we going to make them proud, we're going to do an even better podcast than they did.
Exactly. You heard it here first.
Yep, exactly. So, about Girls Health Ed. So, Girls Health Ed is a nonprofit organization, and our mission is to advance gender equality by fostering healthy, informed, and empowered decision making in adolescent girls and young women, particularly those from low income, underserved communities where they're unlikely to receive the type of information and programs that we offer either at home or at school. And so the way that we go about achieving this mission is by providing medically accurate, gender transformative, intersectional, comprehensive health and sexuality education in schools and community centers in the various areas that we serve. So currently we have programs both in the US and in Kenya. Within the US, we're active in New York, DC, LA, New Orleans, and Miami. And then we're also hoping to expand to more cities within the US and also to more countries around the world. Hopefully, we'll be expanding to India in the next year or so. And then we have a whole roster of countries and cities and states that we'd like to expand to. So basically, the way that our delivery model works is that we have trained teaching fellows who are young women volunteers whom we recruit directly from the communities in which we serve. And these are typically college students, graduate students, young professionals, but those who are close in age to the girls and young women who participate in our workshops so they can serve as near peer role models. And we train them in-house in our in-house developed curriculum to go into schools and community centers and deliver and facilitate our workshops. So we have a very comprehensive curriculum that covers issues around nutrition, physical activity, body image, self-esteem and goal setting, puberty and personal care, violence prevention, healthy relationships and consent, menstruation, and reproductive health. And so Our kind of theory of change in our delivery model is based on this idea that, as I'm sure you can all remember, puberty, adolescence is a really awkward and confusing time where our body and our mind and emotions are going through all of these changes. And so that's associated with a drop in confidence for everybody. But what research has found is that by the time young men reach adulthood, they're more likely to get that confidence back, whereas young women are not. And so this leads to a gender confidence gap throughout the lifespan, which not only affects health outcomes and individual level outcomes, but it affects a girl's ability to, really thrive and succeed in her education, which then affects her future, professional prospects, which then affects her financial and economic prospects. And so this kind of becomes a vicious cycle. And as it turns out, a country's economic well-being is directly tied to the health and the education of its girls and women. And so our theory of change and our work is based on this idea then that when we're able to, intervene at this really critical period of development and give girls and young women the tools to love themselves, take care of themselves, that's setting them up for future success and prosperity, not only in terms of their health, but in all areas of their life. It's, preparing them to have better educational outcomes, better professional outcomes to contribute to the well-being of their economy. And so our, theory and our idea behind this work is that when we're providing comprehensive health and sexuality education to girls and young women, we're not only affecting the lives of girls and young women, we're affecting entire families, entire communities, and entire nations. And the results of our programming speaks for itself. So we've been doing this work now for about 10 years, and I'm proud to say that I'm part of the founding team. I joined the organization when it was
Congratulations.
still, thank you. I joined the organization when it was still in its infancy, and I started off as a volunteer. I helped develop our curriculums, solidify our delivery model, train teaching fellows, help envision what the future of the organization would be. And then I slowly worked my way up. And as of 3 years ago, I'm now running it with the support of an amazing team and board. And so we've been doing this work now for about 10 years, and we've seen some really incredible results. So, for example, we're finding that between 85 and 90% of the girls are reporting feeling more confident talking to their parents or other trusted adults in their lives about the curriculum content, which is, strengthening their relationships with their parents and with their families. 95% of the girls are reporting feeling more confident that they have positive qualities outside of just how they look. Close to 100% of the girls are correctly answering fact-based questions about our curriculum content, particularly in regards to puberty and safer sex and menstruation. And between 95 and 100% of the girls are reporting feeling more confident talking to friends, romantic partners, sexual partners about what their boundaries are, what's important to them about safer sex practices. So this has all been really incredible to hear. And we also have some really powerful anecdotal results. So the example that I always like to share, this was a few years ago at a community center in Washington, D.C. And there had been a group of boys who was bullying a group of girls because they had had their periods. And the girls who had participated in our workshops were actually able to step in and educate the boys and actually explain to them, like, look, if we didn't have our periods, then you wouldn't be here. And so they were,
I love
yeah,
that.
exactly. And so that,
Look at
and
that
that's just
comeback.
exactly, exactly. And so
Uh,
that just goes to show that, again, we're not just affecting girls and young women themselves, but we're actually giving them the tools to, stop bullying, to educate their classmates and others in their community, thereby contributing to healthier families and communities and school climates and whatnot. So that's a little bit of a teaser into our work. And of course, there are many more such anecdotes that I can share, but I love what we do, and it's been incredible to see the impact that our work is having on girls and young women around the world. I think now we're close to about 10,000 girls and young women who have directly participated in our workshops. And then, of course, the indirect impact is probably 5 to 10 times greater because there's evidence, again, that shows that these girls and young women are sharing what they're learning with their friends, classmates, communities, families, and whatnot. So
that's
basically, through all of
incredible.
this, the goal is again to not only improve individual outcomes, but also to change the social and cultural norms that perpetuate gender inequality and that, prevent girls and young women from thriving and really living the best lives that they can.
Oh, thank you for that. That's incredible. And thank you for giving us such a great overview of the work you guys are doing. I can't believe it's been 10 years. That you should be very proud of that. So that's incredible. I would love to hear just personally what first drew you to want to volunteer with this organization. How did you hear about them? And then, yeah, what was it that really resonated with you as a person?
Yeah, so personally, my entry point into this work is very largely driven by personal experiences. So I very openly share with others that I'm someone who struggles with anxiety and depression. And so therefore, mental health has always been extremely important to me. So I've struggled with anxiety and depression for a large portion of my life. I would say I can remember it starting again around puberty and adolescence, so probably from around the time I was 8 or 9 onwards. That being said, I have had access to some incredible resources, first and foremost being my family, who has always supported me and encouraged me and, you know, reminded me not to put so much pressure on myself. But, Simone, I'm sure that you can relate to this too. Our parents are incredible and they've done such fantastic work that has made an impact on the world, and as their offspring, we want to kind of contribute to that legacy and live that legacy as well. And so I can confidently say that my parents themselves have never put any sort of pressure on me, but growing up in the sort of environment that I did grow up in, where I was surrounded by a lot of overachievers, my parents being among the first that I was exposed to, I wanted to do the same for myself. And that unfortunately led to undue pressure that I imposed upon myself. In some ways, you can say that my anxiety drove me because I, have this impressive academic and professional record to show for myself. Whether my anxiety directly contributed to that or not, who knows? It's hard to say, but all's well that ends well. That being said, as I mentioned, I've always been known to, in spite of that anxiety and kind of mental health struggles, I've been known to have a quite positive demeanor throughout my life. And as I mentioned, I've thrived in many areas of my life. Now, fast forward to my first week of college, I was 17. I was separated from my parents. I was going through a lot of emotions personally, academically, and whatnot. And I had a very severe panic attack that unfortunately resulted in my hospitalization. And, this was a very traumatic experience. Of course, when you're going through any sort of mental health struggle, the way that I like to describe it is it's really two separate conditions that we're dealing with. One is the actual signs and symptoms that you're dealing with. So in my case, having a panic attack, that was somatic symptoms like heavy breathing or rapid heartbeat, or, just general thoughts of panic and like the world was going to end and stuff like that. But then the other condition is societal stigma in terms of how we talk about mental health. Now, granted, this was 15 years ago, so we've definitely made a lot of progress in terms of how we talk about mental health and how that kind of cultural and social narrative has changed, but we definitely still have a long way to go. And so what I noticed that, from the EMTs and emergency responders who were handling my case, all the way up to the professionals at the hospital who were supposedly supposed to support me, there was a lot of stigma surrounding what I was going through. So I was outright told things like, young lady, you're not being rational right now. Or don't you understand that there are real issues that people are dealing with? It's not like you have cancer or a broken leg or XYZ. Or the worst was, are your parents really putting this much pressure on you? So
Oh my
yeah, those are some
gosh.
of the things that I had to hear and deal with,
That
which is
makes my like blood boil for you.
right. And that's
Mm.
exactly the last thing that you want to say to somebody who's going through something so emotionally traumatic. So that happened. And again, I can talk about all the ways in which I was lucky. So the fact that I was only 17 means that I was a minor. So my parents were able to get involved and get me out of that situation a lot more quickly than had I been an adult. And then, of course, they were incredibly supportive. And then I had resources at school, and then I had a good friend group. So basically, I survived that trauma. But I also found that through my struggle came my strength. So I think the stigma piece was really what affected me the most, because I realized that here I am. Again, terrible situation, but I got really lucky. But then there are countless other people who are dealing with the exact same thing who are not so lucky. And so this, personal situation really propelled my professional path and made me want to do something to help empower other people who might be struggling. Rather not empower them, but help them realize their own power to take ownership of their health and well-being and realize that they too have the strength within them to cope with whatever is coming their way. So, I got really involved with mental health initiatives on campus, and, I became really inspired to do my undergraduate thesis about mental health stigma in the South Asian immigrant community in the United States. From then, I went on to pursue my master's in public health at Yale University, where I concentrated in social and behavioral sciences. And here I was similarly focused on mental health, but I also came to appreciate just how interdisciplinary public health is and really encompasses all different areas of our life. So literally anything and everything that we're doing in our life or not doing in our life has implications for our health and well-being. And so that interdisciplinarity really stood out to me. So as part of the MPH requirement, I did an internship. We were required to do internships. So I did mine at Stanford University. I was living with my parents at home for the summer, and I did my internship at Stanford University, where I was working with a professor on developing a healthy living skills curriculum for adolescent girls. And then this became the impetus for my master's thesis, which was focused on mental health in adolescent girls. And particularly, I was looking at cyberbullying meets intimate partner violence. So basically, cyber IPV is what I called it. And I was looking at how involvement in this cyber IPV is associated with a number of mental health outcomes. So I looked at anxiety, depression, self-esteem, self-efficacy. And so one of the biggest findings that I found was that childhood trauma is actually a huge risk factor for later involvement in any kind of relationship violence, whether that be romantic or platonic or otherwise. And this includes both as a victim and as a perpetrator of said violence. And so this really speaks to the importance of early intervention and really training kids, training youth from a young age about how to take care of themselves, love themselves, deal with any traumas or adverse situations that are coming their way so that they're not perpetuating that cycle of generational trauma and generational violence, if you will. And so it was actually very serendipitous. So while I was working on my master's thesis, I was still in my last semester at Yale, and I just so happened to be on LinkedIn, and I saw a post from the founder of Girls Health Ed, my colleague and friend Sarah Hilware. And so I just reached out to her and I expressed my passion for the mission and the work that I was doing and my interest in getting involved. And so we spoke. This was December 2013. So at the time, the organization was only a year old. And so we spoke, and then a few months later, I officially became onboarded, but I started off as a volunteer. And then, as I mentioned, I slowly worked my way up. So I've been doing this work now for, as I mentioned, 10 years, and it's been alongside a lot of other work. So in addition to Girls Health Ed, I also do, freelance writing and editing, and I've done, marketing and communications for various other organizations. And, I've done project management at publishing companies, and basically throughout my career, I found all of these ways to combine my love for the creative arts and the storytelling and the writing and, putting one's personal narrative out there with the healing and the mental health. And so that actually led to the publication of two of my books, which I believe you have the first one, and we can definitely talk. Yes,
To
we
all
can
the magic
definitely
in
talk.
me.
Yes, to all the magic in me and psyche. So we can definitely talk about both of these.
Yeah.
And then alongside that, I am also now pursuing my doctorate. I'm pursuing my doctorate in education with a concentration in health and behavioral studies at Columbia University.
You
So
just keep
my
going. That's amazing.
yeah, so my career path, I mean, I left out a lot of the spice and some of the interesting twists and turns, but all of this is to say that my career path has been anything but linear, and I think that's a good thing. Linear is boring. And so,
Yeah.
Simone, when I first met you and when I first met your dad, I was actually like just at an inflection point where I was figuring out what I didn't want to do at my career, and then just beginning to transition into all of the things that I'm doing now. So that was actually a really incredible time when we met. So yeah, all of this is to say it hasn't been a linear path at all. It's been full of lots of twists and turns, but kind of through all of that, the kind of unifying thread is this love for helping other people tap into that power to, realize their own health and well-being, to make healthy, informed, and empowered decisions, and to also tap into the power of their stories, recognizing that everybody's story, everybody's life experience has some value, and that there's always somebody somewhere who's going to benefit from that.
That is amazing. And thank you for being just so vulnerable to share your story. I really feel like just going back to what you said about the struggle to strength, I really feel like that encapsulates your story. And it's only through, I always talk about that with friends too, is that it's only through suffering that we really can experience joy, and that the two things, there's room for both and that they're deeply intertwined. And so I just love that. I really feel like there is such a depth that you carry because of what you've been through. And it's amazing that you're able to use that to help other people in such a practical way as well. So one of my nonprofit partners in the anti-trafficking world, they also go into schools as well, educating young kids about grooming practices. And they also talk about the uses of social media and protecting yourself online, kind of how to spot predators as well, because a lot of it too has to do with these vulnerable populations of usually a lower socioeconomic status, as you know, and people of color as well, and how that can make them more vulnerable, also their home life as well, to potentially being trafficked. So I feel like there is a little bit of that crossover too with self-esteem, mental health, our cyber world. I was actually cyberbullied when I was younger, and so that definitely had a big impact as well on me. And since you shared, I can just, I really resonate a lot with what you were talking about with your experience with anxiety and depression. And I've struggled with that as well. And I actually just had a panic attack on Saturday, so I'm not afraid to say that. I was trying to get my nails done, and anxiety is not convenient. So I always liken it. I mean, everyone experiences it differently, but for me, I get hot and sweaty and I can't breathe and I feel nauseous and just kind of, yeah, it is very unnerving. I was talking about it with my therapist today, and I feel like it's really hard in the moment to your rational brain. You can't access it. You are in fight or flight mode. And I think it can be a very lonely, isolating feeling because outwardly you may actually look fine. Like I can't tell you how many times I've been having a panic attack and people don't know I'm having one. And I'll excuse myself or whatever, but I think internally it's like this storm kind of welling up, and I went through various medications as well. And during COVID, the hospitals as well were overloaded, as many know, and so I actually couldn't be hospitalized, though I was at that point where I really just felt like I was unraveling mentally, and it was really hard to see a way out. And thankfully, my family was just totally there for me and made me feel less alone. And my faith as well was super just core to me and what I was going through at the time and helped me get out of that. But also, art. I feel like art is very, having a creative outlet, like you were saying, storytelling and your beautiful writing. I've read some of your poems, and I really encourage everyone out there to check it out. I feel like there's just something about art and storytelling that helps us to locate our trauma and navigate it in such a unique way. I called my paintings at the time the panic attack series because I felt like I was manically painting, at that time, just to get it out because it was just welling up inside. I didn't know what to do with all of these emotions and yeah, how to navigate them. And like you said, I think it's amazing you got your master's in public health because I've also been on the side of the physical health struggles and dealing with doctors and kind of working within a broken healthcare system. And just even finding a therapist, finding a psychiatrist, like those are really overwhelming things. And we don't have a system that makes it very easy to do that. And so I can relate to, psychiatrists and stuff, just saying things that are, it's really hard in the moment, things that are not helpful at all to your healing. And so I just really commend you for your strength to be able to share this and to also to move through it. So, and to use it for good. So, thank you.
Right back at you, right back at you.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. I would love to also hear more. So now you're an executive director, but you started as a volunteer. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about that journey from volunteer to executive director and how many years was it into volunteering that, what were the steps to get there?
Right. Yeah. So as I mentioned, I started off as a volunteer like end of 2013, beginning of 2014. And I think I just really demonstrated how committed I was to the organization and how aligned it was with both my personal mission and my professional mission and everything that I had gone to school for. And so, yeah, so this would have been 2014. And at the time, I was splitting my time between, so I was just graduating from Yale. And then after that, I was splitting my time between California and DC. And so, Girls Health Ed is headquartered in DC. And so, when I was living in DC, I would go to a lot of events. I would, meet up with the team who was based in DC. I would, actually teach workshops. I would meet with other teaching fellows. And then from there, I started training other teaching fellows in the curriculum that I played a very instrumental role in developing. And so I think, through all of the personal life changes that I was going through, whether that be at my day job and just kind of other things that I had going on in my life, I continued to stay dedicated to Girls Health Ed and just was committed to making an impact and helping the organization to grow and meet its organizational goals. And so actually exactly around the time I met you, I believe it was June 2016 was when we first met,
You have a better
right?
memory than I do. It seems
Um,
like so long ago, but it wasn't.
yeah,
So
yeah. So I think I met your dad in April 2016, and then I met you in June 2016. Yeah. And
that's
don't ask how
amazing.
I remember these things, I just do.
No, I
Um,
love it. I love it.
yeah. But no,
Yeah.
that was actually a really critical time for me because, as I mentioned, I had been feeling frustrated in previous professional pursuits, and this was the time that things really started to change. And again, it was all very serendipitous. And I think a lot of it also just has to do with being in the right place at the right time and also putting the right energy out there to allow for the right opportunities to come back to you. And that's exactly what started happening around this time. So I started picking up a lot of freelance work. It was also around the time that I started my own freelance editing business, which I call Pavita, which is a play on my name.
I
Um,
love that.
and then Girls Health Ed at the time was really wanting to, ramp up their programming and outreach efforts. And they saw me as fit for the role. So they offered me part-time paid work as the director of programs and outreach. And so, I did that work for about 4 years, really excelled in that work. And then, in the midst of the pandemic, again, we were really revisiting our organizational priorities and we had set out a 5-year organizational vision and, the priorities of our founder, who was the former executive director, were also changing. And so she relocated and needed somebody else to take over as the executive director. And so that ended up being me. And so I think a large part of it just does have to do with my personal commitment to the organization and being there from the very beginning and, being there through all of the changes and demonstrating how important this work is to me. And I believe that pretty much sums up how the transition was from being a volunteer to running it, especially when I first started off in executive director role. I mean, speaking of anxiety, there was a lot of anxiety that I was
I
going
was
through
gonna say, I was like,
the
wow, a lot of
transition.
responsibility, I'm sure, and pressure
It
as
was
well.
definitely a lot of responsibility because
Mm.
previously my role had really been in the programs and outreach side of things. And so if you ask me anything about girls' health ed programming and outreach, I know it like the back of my hand and I can answer it in a split second. But now here I was having to learn all kinds of new skills, whether that be budgeting or fundraising or managing other team members and board members and really expanding my sense of organizational vision and where we want this organization to be over the next year, 5 years, 10 years, and really strategically thinking through the steps to get there. Strategic thinking is another skill that I've had to learn to develop. So in the beginning, it was definitely there was a lot of anxiety that came with the transition to learning all of these new skills. But with the support of my team and mentors, I feel like I, have thrived in the role and will continue to do so. And I think another thing that's important to me, and I owe a lot of this to my dad, who is himself a leader and has shown me really what ideal leadership looks like. And I think it really just comes to like if you're a good human being, then you have half of what it takes to be a good leader. I think it all starts in recognizing one's humanness and seeing all of the people who work on your team as humans first, not as employees, not as paychecks, not as somebody who's going to donate this much to help you get to, the next phase of your organizational development, but human beings with their own feelings, their own issues, and their own stories. And so when you keep that in mind, I think that's half, if not more than half, of what it means to be a good leader. So for me, it's really important to inculcate this organization of self-care first and mental health first, making sure that I'm checking in with everybody and seeing how they're doing, what they might need from me, what they're liking, not liking. And so I think just kind of putting that humanness at the center of my leadership has been a really important part of my work. And I think especially it's been important to an organization like Girls Health Ed, which is all about promoting self-care and self-love. If we're going to be teaching girls and young women how to do that for themselves, then we better be ready to practice what we preach. We can't just talk the talk. We have to be
Yes.
walking the walk as well, because as people who are so mission driven and dedicated to the mission of the work that we're doing, it can be all too easy to get caught up in that. And in fact, it can be all too easy for professionals who are dedicated to self-care to kind of take on the issues that their constituents or that the people that they're serving are experiencing as well. And so especially I think in an organization like ours that is dedicated to promoting self-care and loving yourself and taking care of yourself, it becomes even more important to practice that for ourselves, because otherwise there's no way that we can bring our best selves into the work we do. And I just think for me, it's really important that if we're, sending this message to the girls and young women on the ground, then that message better be, pervading throughout the entire organization, from the leadership and, to the employees, to the teaching fellows, to, whoever we're bringing in as partners, as donors and whatnot. So I think that's been a really key learning for me and something that I will strive to continue to do in this role.
I love that you say that. It sort of reminds me, I don't know if you've heard of the term compassion fatigue, but I
Mm-hmm.
feel like when I've talked to a lot of social workers, that's something that tends to come up because, yeah, it's like you truly won't be as effective in leading others if you're not leading yourself first. So, and caring for yourself in whatever way is most helpful for you. So that may look different for everyone, but I think that's just a good reminder for people out there, whether they're in college or whether they're just starting out their careers or whether you're 20 years into your career. I think it never is something that gets old or becomes less important. So Yeah, I was just about to say too, with these various programs that Girls Health Ed runs, what are some of the challenges you guys have seen pop up, and how have you guys kind of gone about addressing those?
Yeah. So, I mean, funding is always the number one challenge. I think any nonprofit, organization leader will say that. So that's one challenge. But, I'm proud to say that we've made steady progress every year in terms of our fundraising. Other challenges is, just the fact that because we are working with the most underserved and underprivileged communities, that does become an issue just in terms of logistics. So these schools and community centers are already extremely overwhelmed. And then, unfortunately, what happens is programs like Girls Health Ed kind of get thrown under the bus, if you will, or kind of like seen like thrown to the bottom of the barrel. Unfortunately, what happens is programs like ours are not seen on the same level of importance as, the traditional academic subjects, or, these organizations must, might be scrapped for funding, or might other organizations like the schools and community centers that we're working with might be scrapped for funding and might have to, demonstrate other organizational priorities that Girls Health Ed again is put to the bottom of the barrel. And so I think the way that we deal with that is just being persistent, but also getting people to recognize that health education and comprehensive health and sexuality education aren't by any means less important than any of the traditional academic subjects. In fact, it's important that health and sexuality education be viewed on the same level of importance as academic subjects, because again, when you have the tools to take care of yourself, it improves your self-esteem, it improves your academic outcomes, and it allows you to bring your best self into the work that you do. And again, this has implications not only for one's academics and for one's individual health, but if you look beyond that and look at the bigger picture, we see the impact that it has on entire communities. It actually helps to lift communities out of poverty. And so I think, there are also people out there who might not buy into what we're offering, and especially given some of the type of content that we offer and talk about in our programs, there might be some stigma or bias against what we offer. And I think getting people to recognize its importance by drawing parallels with the issues that are important to them. So for example, if somebody thinks that the economy is more important than health, you have to be able to draw the connection between health education and economic outcomes. So
Yes.
that's another challenge. And then I think the third challenge, as we talked about, is just this kind of idea of compassion fatigue and burnout and sustainability. And so that's why, we're taking steps to make our organization more sustainable so that this type of burnout and fatigue doesn't happen. And, encouraging those who work with us to prioritize their self-care and mental health above all. So I think that those are some of the key challenges and how we've kind of coped with them.
I love that. And also, we haven't really talked about it yet, but I would love to hear why Kenya. I think that's so cool that you guys, you not only work within the US, but you've also kind of zoomed out and looked at other parts of the world.
Yeah, definitely. So, this Girls Health Ed is something that we would absolutely love to have all over the world. So, the reason that Kenya happened, so this would have been around 2015, and our founder, Sarah Hillware, was at a UN event in Washington, D.C. And Mama Sarah Obama, so the grandmother of President Obama, happened to be there. And so the two Sarahs spoke. And so Mama Sarah Obama spoke to Sarah Hillware about the Mama Sarah Obama Foundation in Kenya and the work that they're doing to empower girls and young women. They spoke about the work that Girls Health Ed is doing, and Mama Sarah Obama spoke about the needs of girls and young women in Kenya. So some particular issues that came up were around sanitation and hygiene, but also female genital mutilation or early child marriage and pregnancy or school dropouts and those sorts of issues, and how girls' health ed could be seen as part of the solution to addressing those issues. And so thus was the start of a partnership between Girls Health Ed and the Mama Sarah Obama Foundation. From there, we got into some of the schools that Mama Sarah Obama Foundation was working with in Kagelo in Kenya and then also in Nairobi. Then it got to a point, I believe this was in around 2019, where the Mama Sarah Obama Foundation was actually decreasing their operations in Kenya. And so then we took on their program coordinator as our program coordinator so that we can continue to do the work that we're doing in Kenya. And now we've since brought on a Kenya program manager who's helped us to amplify the impact that we've had there. So now we've gotten into even more counties and reached even more girls and young women who are dealing with all kinds of issues, and especially during pandemic. And so in fact, this comes back to the challenges that Girls Health Ed and other similar organizations were facing during pandemic. So when schools were closing, first of all, we didn't have a venue in which to even do in-person workshops, but then programs like Girls Health Ed, comprehensive sexuality education, were among the first to be, again, thrown to the bottom of the barrel. And so that this, made it even more important to emphasize the importance of the work we were doing, because it was during pandemic that so many of the issues that we're trying to address with our work became amplified, including, school dropout, girls and young women in Kenya being sold into prostitution or being forced into early marriage, in order to improve the family's financial situation, for example, or, because families' financial situations were struggling, girls and young women often couldn't afford personal care products or even food. So sometimes in the informal settlements, they would line up at pad drives or food drives to, bring home food or personal care products to, hygienically manage their menstruation. But then when they would come home, what would happen is they would be beaten up by their fathers or their brothers because they're saying that this brings shame on the family. You're basically outing to others that we're not able to take care of our family. And then gender-based violence significantly increased. So from March 2000 to December 2000, I believe 4,000 girls and young women in Kenya became unwantedly pregnant. And so fast forward to December 2020 onwards, there were actually girls and young women in our workshops were young mothers themselves and were bringing, their children into the workshops with them. And so, these are the types of issues that we would see on the ground. And in 2019, I actually had the opportunity to travel to Kenya and do workshops with girls and young women on the ground, and it really helped to solidify and establish our programs there. And so we asked them, what are the issues that you're facing and what do you want to see addressed? And they talked about female genital mutilation. They talked about, how do we continue with our education when our families don't want us to? Our families just see us as, property for our future husbands so that their financial situation can improve. So that's been the trajectory of our work in Kenya. And as I mentioned, next on our roster, we have India, and we're hoping that that's going to take place over the next few months. And then a lot of other organizations in other countries and other states and other cities have reached out to us about doing workshops there. And we've had a lot of, interested teaching fellows from other cities reach out. So our hope is that, with adequate resources, this is something that we'll be able to provide to girls and young women everywhere, because I truly do believe that this is a program that can change lives.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's so incredibly important. And I love that you ask the community that you are seeking to serve what they see their greatest needs are. I think that's so important that we don't rush in with our own assumptions of what another community needs, that we always are mindful to ask them first. And so I love that you guys do that. And that kind of brings me to one of my last questions for you is, are there any exciting new upcoming projects that you guys are working on? I know you just mentioned expanding to other countries, but are there any specific workshops or things that are kind of in the mix right now that you're working on?
Yeah, definitely. So in October, there's going to be this worldwide virtual 1.8 billion campaign, is what it's called. 1.8 billion represents the number of adolescents that there are in the world. And this campaign is to amplify the voices of young people and ask them what it is that they want around their health and well-being. And so Girls Health Ed is an active partner in this campaign. And leading up to the campaign, we'll be having our own virtual webinar where we bring forward those who are advocates for comprehensive sexuality education and practitioners of comprehensive sexuality education. And we'll use this as a venue to talk about best practices in CSE, but also talk about why advocacy for CSE is so important. Again, not only on the individual level, but also on the interpersonal level and on the systems and societal level. So that's something that we have coming up, and we're targeting second or third week of September for that webinar, and I'm happy to share. And in fact, if anybody wants to follow Girls Health Ed on social media, it's just at Girls Health Ed, and you can find out everything about what's going on with the organization. And you can also check out our website, girlshealthed.org. You can sign up for our newsletter and also see, you can learn more about our curriculum and see photos from our workshops. Another exciting ongoing is the addition of a new unit in our curriculum all about this emerging concept of reproductive identity. And we're going to be piloting that in Kenya and then hopefully bringing that to the US as well. And that's actually partially driven by my academic work right now. So reproductive identity is a new and emerging concept which has to do with how people see themselves and are viewed by others in terms of the questions of if, when, and how to have kids. And it's a concept that sees parenthood versus non-parenthood as on a spectrum rather than a binary, recognizing all of the various ways that people can choose to have families or not have families, but also their various psychological desires and various behaviors that reflect these questions of if, when, and how to have kids or be a parent. So that's something that I'm excited to explore in my own academic work and to bring into Girls Health Ed as well. And the idea behind the inclusion of this new unit is to really give these girls and young women the space and the autonomy to really imagine what they truly see their reproductive future looking like, recognize that that's something that can change over time. So yeah, those are some exciting updates from our end.
Thank you. Yeah, and we'll definitely link the website and social media in our show notes for those who are interested in knowing more and getting involved and connecting with you as well. Just to close us out here, I always kind of ask my guests this closing question. It's very broad, but what comes to mind for you? What I just want to know what inspires you most.
I inspire myself the most.
I love it. Yes. We love to hear that. That's amazing. We all should inspire ourselves more. So I love that. Thank you so much, Pavita. And I just loved talking to you more and hearing more about the important work you're doing. And I'm just excited to see where that continues to take you. So thank you for joining us on the Conscious Cup.
Thank you so much for having me, and may this be the first of many more.